Welcome back to MyFinJourney. Today's guest is Devon Bruce, founder and CEO of the English Communication Academy, where she helps healthcare organizations fix something that most people completely underestimate: communication. Not as a soft skill, but as infrastructure. Devon coined the idea of communication debt, the hidden buildup of misalignment that weakens trust and quietly costs organizations billions of dollars over time. She's worked with global healthcare teams, medical institutions, and even collaborated with Stanford Engineering on AI in healthcare education, all focused on one thing: how communication actually works under pressure, inside hierarchy, across cultures, and in critical moments. This is going to be a great episode, and I'm really excited for Devon to join us. Devon, welcome to My Fin Journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
No, it's our pleasure. Devon, we all go through school, we all go through education process, we all communicate, we all talk. It doesn't feel like communication is that big of a deal until you learn what you don't know. So help us understand, your journey. Help us unpack when you realized communication was so important and when you realized that there was this idea of communication debt.
Sure. So it actually started in 2016 when I became an ESL teacher, an English as a second language teacher. And between 2016 and 2020, I was just teaching English online as a second language. I got my certification to do that. And in that time, I came across a lot of doctors through my classes. And they kept asking me, or they kept telling me, Devin, I'm fluent already in English. I don't need English classes. I need community skills. I need presentation skills. I need critical thinking skills. And so that ultimately started my business in 2020, helping them with their English communication. They were already fluent, but they were having some confidence issues speaking English, which affected their communication. So I was in that space for a while, and then I expanded to working with global teams. My team and I would help global teams with their communication breakdowns. And it was in that space where I really learned that communication was a big deal because I would have native English speakers privately come to me, both in person and on LinkedIn, telling me, Devin, I struggle with this too. I have communication doubts too. And so it was my experience working with global teams and helping them work as a unit and then working across teams where I would hear people say, yeah, I notice that too when I have a handoff. Or, yeah, I really notice that when management says that I don't speak up either. So I really took a step back and started thinking about all the things that I was seeing, and a lot of it was very invisible. It was very quiet. It was very, you don't really see it until you start putting the pieces together. And that is where I started coming up with the idea of communication debt, because it was first exposed with me working exclusively with non-native English speakers in healthcare. And then it expanded when I started working with global teams. And so it's been very fascinating to do this line of work because in healthcare, communication breakdowns cost the system billions of dollars each year. And it doesn't start with like this big, huge issue. It normally usually starts at the handoff or someone not feeling comfortable speaking up. And when that happens over and over and over again, that debt becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until it starts becoming either a safety risk or an operational risk. So it's been a very interesting journey to get to this point.
Devin, that's really powerful. I want to dive a lot deeper to really help the average person who maybe doesn't have a healthcare background, the average person who maybe doesn't think about the billions of dollars that this impacts. I want to really get more granular to really drive home this point because you mentioned the gaps, but I can definitely imagine that it would go over someone's head until it's like really painted in a really clear picture. So help us understand maybe the person who was presenting, who came to you.
Sure.
Like, how did they get to a position where they realized that their presenting sucked, or maybe that their presenting could be 1% better? And what was that stopping them from? Was it stopping them from their ideas getting understood, from them getting a promotion? Like, let's just drive as deep as possible into one specific example and kind of build from there, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So a typical case would be something like this. A system is having an issue with their operations. They've been noticing that they are losing either money, or they're having poor customer service results, or their patients are not having a good time in their system. And leadership is like, okay, everything's working fine, everything's working okay. We don't know what the problem is. And so this is how it usually starts. The leadership presents an idea, and the people in the meeting, their heads are nodding, they're writing notes, everything's fine, everything's working smoothly. And then leadership says, are there any questions? And then no one has any questions. But then a few days later, there's that email. Hey, just to confirm, did you mean? Or, I don't really know what they meant, but I didn't feel comfortable asking that question. That's how it starts, where leadership or one entity thinks that they're being clear, but the person receiving it is not. And so they either have to come up with their own clarity, or they find a workaround, or they have to send that email and CC everyone and say, just to confirm, what did you mean by this? So that's how it starts. And then when that gets compounded by, let's say, weeks or months, depending on what the issue is, then you start seeing it in the reports saying, hey, this system is having a lot of issues, but on paper, it looks like things are working normally. But the communication is breaking down somewhere along the chain. Does that make sense?
Definitely, Devin. And do you feel like it's just a communication gap? Do you feel like it's an issue with company culture? Like, when you look at these types of challenges, how do you analyze and understand them? What creates a situation for me as somebody who thinks he's communicating clearly? What creates that environment where people can ask questions to further clarify what the vision is?
That's a really good question. And to be perfectly honest, it really depends on the system. Sometimes it is leadership, where they think that they're speaking clearly, or they think that they are approachable and they're really not. Where a lot of these meetings that are especially high pressure, they have high demands, where speed is rewarded, not necessarily efficiency. So people don't feel comfortable speaking up. So that's one case where, again, like, the leader thinks that they're communicating effectively and they're not. Other parts could be the person does not feel comfortable speaking to the leader about, I don't really know if this will work, or hey, I'm noticing I'm having problems with this, or I think I see an issue here. They don't feel comfortable in their work culture to bring up those problems because they might feel reprimanded, or they might feel like they might get kickback for not just following what leadership says. It really depends on the system and how leadership shows up.
That's beautiful. It's very powerful because it really just tells you that, the power is not really one-sided. It's a relationship. Communication requires two people to give, take, to give and receive, to like communicate your vision and then really look at the person to really understand the subtext of what isn't being said, to ultimately conclude if your message landed the way you intended. I guess, Devin, for you, when you look back at it, do you feel like in your personal life, in your professional life, there are still communication debts that are just maybe more difficult to unpack than others?
When you say my personal life, like in my personal relationships, do I feel like I have communication debt?
Yeah, like, or do you see it maybe like, between, your friend and their sibling, your parents or other people's parents, or just in life, right?
Yeah.
Going out in
Oh,
life, do you feel like,
absolutely.
oh, hey, like I went to the grocery store and this guy really sucked with customer service, or I went to the bank and this guy really did an amazing job de-escalating a situation.
Yes, absolutely. Communication debt is everywhere. The reason why that it's so prevalent in healthcare is because it's one of the very few industries where communication is a matter of life or death. And so it's very high pressure. So that's the reason why it's critical that the communication is like a well-oiled machine. I always say that communication is just like a house, because when you think of a house, right? You don't think of the foundation of the house unless you see cracks in the walls. But those cracks did not happen immediately. That's been building over time. That's when you really start thinking, oh, I got to do something about this foundation of my house because my whole house can fall down. But if things are working smoothly, you don't even think about it.
That's a profound example. I love it because I'm in real estate, so I obviously have my own bias. So when you think of communication debt, when you think of the gaps, maybe the idea that, sometimes we don't know what we don't know, do you feel like it's also relevant for these executives from a financial literacy perspective as well, in terms of, blind spots?
Absolutely. Because the thing is, when it comes to communication, it's not a metric that people normally track on their data sheets. They do track things like handoffs. And so if you can pinpoint where the actual delay is and then focus on that from a communication standpoint and figure out what is the issue, then you naturally, depending on the system, of course, you start seeing improvements with handoffs, which then ultimately helps the bottom line. Now, just to be clear, that's not necessarily the case for everything, but it absolutely can be a contributing factor to the operational risk of a system.
So Devin, if you don't mind, help me walk through this. If you're saying we
Sure.
have this healthcare company that operates in high stakes environments and their
Mm-hmm.
ability to hand off tasks efficiently is delayed because of poor communication, that will cost
Mm-hmm.
the company a lot of money. Do you think that
Mm-hmm.
same handoff risk exists with like couples talking about finance, or parents talking to their kids about managing personal financial decisions? I want to kind of bridge that
Absolutely.
gap to say, any executive might be good at building a team, but they might be bad at, communicating the vision, or they might be good at communicating the vision at work, but maybe bad at communicating the vision at school or with their kids, rather. I want to understand from your perspective, given that you are an expert in communication, have you kind of noticed these, communication gaps that ultimately lead to, communication debt, as you refer to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because when it's the same scenario. So if you're having a couple and they're arguing about money, one person might be thinking that they're speaking very clearly and they are effective in their communication, but the other person receiving it may not think that they're being clear. And so that lack of clarity plus the perception of the situation at hand can lead to all kinds of communication debt.
And so then what's the solution, Devin? Because it felt like in the corporate environment, the solution was to email your manager and reconfirm, or email your coworkers and reconfirm. What is what is the solution? And is that even the most efficient solution, number one? And as a secondary, number two, like, there's a solution for work. Is that solution also the same thing in the personal life?
I'd say there's similarities. So going back to the example at work, asking for confirmation from their boss about something that they talked about before. That's actually communication debt accumulating because they weren't clear the first time. So, just to answer your question, a really good way to stop that is the leader, before the meeting is adjourned, do not ask a very vague, are there any questions? Because 95% of the time, people are going to say no because they don't have questions. They need to be clear on what comes. So the leader needs to say, okay, who is doing what by this deadline? They need to be very specific with their words. So that way, everybody on the team knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing and in the time frame if it's applicable. So that's one way to stop communication debt from a leadership perspective, getting very clear on the time frame and what the person is doing. Now, when it comes to the, let's say, the husband and wife, getting clear on what is understood. Because if someone is saying we're in a lot of debt, and then the other person might feel guilty because they might think it's their fault, when the person saying we're in a lot of debt could be fear based, and it's like, oh, you know we need to do something about it. That other person might take that as I'm doing something wrong, it's my fault, that person's blaming me. So coming to a solution saying, okay, what can we do to fix the problem? What's your responsibility? What's my responsibility? And what's our time frame on solving this problem? So I guess to answer your question, there's definitely similarities on each person having a clear idea of who's doing what and in what time frame.
And do you feel like people normally communicate like this?
I don't think so, no. I'm being so serious. I don't think so because it takes a large amount of self awareness and ownership. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who do not like taking ownership. They don't like the discomfort of being wrong. And so sometimes, and I'm sure you see this in your line of work, it's easier for people to blame the other person than to take ownership of your part in the communication breakdown.
Yeah, I definitely see it. I hear you. I think it's one of those things that, can be unpacked in so many different layers to say, hey, why don't we speak like this? Maybe because we were never trained to speak like this. Why were we never trained to speak
Mm-hmm.
like this? Because we never met Devon, right? Like there has to be a genesis
Thank
to
you.
say, no problem. There has to be, an origin point to say, hey, people aren't understanding my message. Maybe I'm being too vague. Like it's very normal to end a meeting like, hey guys, if you have any questions, let me know. That means you're leaving the door open. You're accessible, you're open. But the flip side, as you nicely pointed out, is hey, you're ending the meeting with ambiguity rather than here are your next steps, go and do it, which to some people feels micromanaging. So it's like you got to your level by being able to execute. So you expect the people around you can execute, but maybe the people around you need to be upskilled a little bit more before they can go out and actually execute autonomously without you micromanaging them. But giving them steps feels a bit micromanagey. So I guess, Devin, how do you unpack that? The idea of people needing a clear roadmap versus a person feeling like they're being micromanaged.
That's a really good question. And that's the reason why I always say it really depends on the system. Because if the leadership sets a tone where they can say, hey, just to confirm, did you mean, well, that's not necessarily that big of a deal because the leadership brings the environment where that's okay to get that kind of clarity. The issue is if you run into that and they need to confirm and they are the person asking the question feels very afraid of being reprimanded or getting kickback. And so that's why I'm saying like it really depends on the situation. So depending on the situation, it can be so clear just to say, okay, just to make sure that we are all on the same page, who's doing what? And then we'll reconvene in a week. Like the other day, I just recently posted on LinkedIn, instead of saying this, say this. And I was so grateful. I loved the feedback that I got off of it because it's so easy to say something like, I'll handle it ASAP. Okay, but what does ASAP mean? To you, that might be at the end of business today. To another person, that might be end of business tomorrow. To the person receiving it, that might be end of business a week from now. But if you say, okay, I'll give that to you by 3 p.m. tomorrow, that completely eliminates the confusion. So I can understand how someone can say that something like that could be micromanaged, but when you remove the ambiguity, it just makes things so much more efficient. But it's those small little things, like I said, that you don't think about that can cause so many problems.
And do you feel like that clarity, Devin, comes from experience? Because again, the idea is in theory, no one's really learning this unless they're listening to you, unless they're interacting with your content. They're thinking, hey, ASAP means as soon as possible. Like that means it's the priority, whether it's 1 business day or 3 business days, I'm going to get it done. But then maybe from upper management perspective, like that clarity is important. That way they can model out what needs to be done next after that first task is done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because that's why I made that visual on LinkedIn the other day saying instead of this, say this. Because again, I can send that to you and you might be thinking something completely different. And then, just as like a side note, if there's a language difference, that could mean something else, you know? So yeah, it can be really difficult to pinpoint when we all have different interpretations of what's being said, which is
No,
why
I love that.
clarity is the name of the game. Full
I
stop.
love that. So when you're looking at it, right, I'm sure you've been in many presentations. Do you feel like you notice more communication gaps or presentation gaps or slide deck gaps or Canva gaps? What are the gaps that you see that ultimately lead to an overarching communication debt?
You're talking about like if someone's giving a presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna give two examples. One that I typically see with native English speakers, and then another one that I typically see with non-native English speakers, because there's a bit of overlap, but just to keep it simple, I'll use two examples. For native English speakers, something that I see is that they jam pack way too much information in a small amount of time. And so they are just they're just giving away all this information. And so their audience tunes out because it's just too much. So instead of scaling back and thinking, okay, what is one thing that I want my audience to remember? Not 10, not 21, and focus on that, that can cause a lot of problems because they think that they're being clear, but they're giving way too much information. So that's something that I see with a lot of native English speakers. Non native English speakers, a lot of them feel nervous, especially if this is a very important or very high pressure situation. And so they tend to talk too fast. And so they're not clear with their speech. And so if they're nervous or if they are terrified that someone's going to ask them a question and they don't know how to answer it in English, then that can cause a lot of fear, a lot of doubt, a lot of ums and uhs when they speak. And unfortunately, this is the truth. If you're not clear in your English, or not English, but if you're not clear in your presentation, people are going to think that you're not capable, you're not the right person, when it just could simply be they're speaking too quickly. So a lot of times back, especially when I was an English coach, telling them to slow down, breathe, make sure that your body is regulated, and then speak, because there's power in the pause. A lot of people are afraid of the pause. That brief silence is very powerful depending on the situation. So those are the two things that I would typically see.
I love that, Devin, and I really appreciate it because I pause a lot.
Thanks.
So I want to really unpack this because you mentioned the native speaker. I'm a native speaker. You mentioned the native speaker of English that packs too much information on their slide. I studied genetics. Our slides are very dense. Our information, our manuscripts are built to put people to sleep, right? And I'm dyslexic. You can imagine how difficult it was to read that small text, using words, dyslexic, etc. Right? So like a situation designed for failure. Luckily, I thrive. The point, Devin, that I'm trying to kind of illustrate in a roundabout way with a decent amount of context is the circles that I was in was, hey, you're surrounded by a lot of smart people. Hey, you're communicating very dense, intellectual concepts.
Hmm.
Put a lot of text on your slides. This was like, the common thought. Put a lot of text on your slides because there's a lot of information that we need to go through versus when you actually took a class on like effective communication in genetics, it was, hey, the best studies that get the most notoriety are not based on the best science. It's based on the people that are able to effectively communicate their vision. So I'm mentioning that because it feels like there's a subtext of I'm very good at what I do. So let me put a lot of information on my slides to just throw out a lot of information at people because it will stick versus, hey, just because you're very good at what you do does not mean that that's an effective way to teach somebody or communicate your ideas to somebody who's also very good at what they do, but they're not you. So they're good at a different space and they need to kind of slowly learn and absorb what you're saying. So I wanted to understand, Devin, from your perspective, how do you reconcile for native speakers to get their buy-in? Because typically you're probably talking to executives, you're probably talking to people who are very good at what they do, and you're essentially saying
Hmm.
less is more. How do
Yes.
you get their buy-in? Because it feels like if they knew that, they would have already been doing it. So when you tell them, they're like, yeah, I don't believe you.
Well, that's a really good question. The thing is, I get a little kickback when I say that, but I just have to show them the receipts. I'm like, this is your problem, if your way was working, I wouldn't be here. My team wouldn't be here. So, what do you have to lose to scale it back, simplify it so that way it's memorable? Because again, if you're throwing all of this information, people are going to tune out, they're not going to care, and it's going to go over people's heads even though they're all on the same playing field. But if you simplify it and think of just one big thing that you want people to remember, that's golden, because they'll remember what you're actually saying versus just having a lot of information thrown at them.
I love that, Devin, because you said something that wouldn't close me, but which is why I want to unpack it. But you said something that is really powerful. And before I go into that, I want to take a pause for a second, not because Devin recommends it, but because the algorithm does. If you're enjoying this episode, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it with a friend. So, Devin, you said that they already trust you to some degree because they've brought
Yes,
you on because they have a problem. And if they didn't have that problem, you wouldn't be there. So it's like this
yes.
self-fulfilling loop. I'm here because you need me. So because you need me, listen to me. That doesn't work for me because I'm like, nah, I'm just, learning what I don't know. That doesn't mean it's the right fit for me, right? It could be the right fit for somebody else. But for you, right, it clearly works. And I want to unpack why it works. How did you establish the social proof or the credibility for them to be like, hey, I need to reach out to Devin to then be able to say, like, this is a put up or shut up moment. I'm here. Do what I say and will work. Trust me.
That's a really good question. The reason why that, I guess from a personal reason, it works because I'm the type that I listen to my gut. Now, I know that is a hot take for many people, but if
Not for
I
me.
can get a feel, yeah, if I can get a feel or a good vibe off of someone, I'm like, okay, they know something that I don't. So I am willing to listen to what this person has to say because I do not know everything. I want this problem fixed. So if I come in with a bunch of yeah buts, now getting clarity is one thing. Asking questions, totally valid. But if it's like, yeah, no, this is not going to work, then find someone else because this is the way that I operate. But to answer your question, how I got social proof, it took some years, and also I think to be perfectly honest, I did two things. One, I showed up authentically. I wasn't trying to put on airs. I wasn't trying to be someone that I'm not. I show up on LinkedIn, big hair and all, saying, look, this is what's going on. This is how you solve it. And it's going to resonate with some, and it's not. And that's totally fine. Also, I feel like I was able to name something that is invisible. And when you're able to take a step back, take a look at the system and name it and say, hey, this debt gets paid with interest all the time. People can understand that, you know? So when that's repeated over and over, and I have the content to back that up, like the visual, like I said, instead of this, say this. And people were like, oh my gosh, I say that all the time. That makes so much sense. Over time, that gets people to trust you. But, and that's totally fine. Just like with everyone else, it's either going to resonate or it's not. So it's totally good.
I love that, and it does resonate with me. There was a couple of different things that you said that resonated specifically. I want to touch on one of them. When you said to
Sure.
show up authentically you.
Yes.
Devin, is that an idea that you feel like you were born with? You feel like came to you over time, or like help me understand how you got to that point to be authentically you?
That's a really good question. I had to go within and really do the work. I
Was it
mean,
fun?
I hit my
Was
no,
doing the
it
work
was
fun?
no, it was very uncomfortable. I had to get real with myself. I had to really take ownership of my flaws, take responsibility where I needed to take responsibility, and also not try to be someone that I'm not. Once upon a time, I was a people pleaser and I was a perfectionist. And when I first started my business in 2020 as an English coach selling my packages to doctors, it didn't resonate at first because I thought I had to be someone that I'm not in order for people to take me seriously. But then once it wasn't resonating, and I was just like, it's not resonating because I'm not being real with it. I've got to put my Devon spin on it. I got to put my seasoning on it, you know? And once I just threw out the rule book and I was like, I'm going to do it my way, full stop. That's when things really started to turn around.
So, Devin, when you added that Devin flavor, was it that you were just trying different things? Was it that you were frustrated with the process? Was it that you got one customer through a different avenue? What led you to realize that the rule book needed to change?
That's a really good question. I realized that a lot of the traditional things when it came to business development and coaching, a lot of that traditional stuff did not work for me. For example, I was a single mom with two young kids trying to start a business. So I did not have 24/7 to work on my business because my daughter needed to go to practice or I had to take my son to the dentist. So a lot of the traditional stuff is not built for women like me. That's just the reality of it. So once I realized, okay, this traditional way of doing things is not built for single moms who need to stop working on my business because I got to cook dinner and give my kids baths, I had to come up with my own way of doing things. And that trial and error was messy. It was hard. I cried and prayed to God and plenty of times, but I figured it out. I figured it out along the way, and I'm so grateful for that because now where I'm at, I help so many people, and I love being of service in this way. I love helping the helpers. And I would not have been able to come up with this communication debt if I didn't do the messy stuff first, both professionally and personally.
I love that, Devin, because we started the conversation with how important communication is, even though it's something that people think is quite basic. And now we've transitioned to how important clarity is. Clarity is one of those things that people don't even realize that they need to focus on. They don't realize that this hard work of knowing yourself is actually probably the first step on your journey of financial stability, financial freedom. Like, how are you going to
Yes.
understand how to create value for the market if you don't even know yourself? How are you going to understand the market? The market is comprised of many individuals. So you mentioned the fact that you're a single mom. I appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned your background. Prior to that, you mentioned, selling English to physicians, to doctors. Do you feel like the person following the real rule book and doing everything the traditional way has had more success than you have had? Because you have had to pivot, create a rule book, and then follow
Mm-hmm.
it while managing other things in life, other challenges, which everyone has their challenges. But somebody else was following that rule book that is the traditional route. And in theory, it's the traditional route because it works. But,
Mm-hmm.
when I look at my own life and when I look at my journey and the different, strategies that I've implemented, it feels like not following the rule book means that you accomplish maybe 10 years of growth in like 3 years. So I wanted to understand, has that also been your experience with respect to communication and helping clients?
Oh, 1,000%. I feel like because I had to throw out the rule book, I my learning curve, it felt like I had to go through 20 years of business development in like three because I had to figure it out on my own. So when it comes to success, I really use that subjectively because some people may not think I'm successful because of where I'm at. But for me, just knowing where I was and everything that I have been through, both personally and professionally, where I'm at now. I just hit 20,000 followers on LinkedIn, all
Congratulations.
organic. Thank you. Thank you. My biggest demographic of people following me are senior positions and above. Over half of my audience are in that demographic. And I'm not saying that as a flex. I'm saying that because I was able to achieve that because I showed up authentically. If I followed the traditional path that just wasn't for me, I would still be floundering because I thought I was doing things the right way. The right way. So I think success just really depends on the person and what they define success. Do you really want to know what my true definition of success is? Like real talk?
Yeah, real talk. Share.
The fact that my 15-year-old daughter and my 13-year-old son think that I'm cool. And we have family fun days every weekend that we're together. They're with their dad every other weekend. But on our weekends, we have Saturday's fun day or Sunday fun day. And we spend time together as a family. My almost 16-year-old daughter will come to me and be like, "Mommy, you're not gonna believe," insert some sort of teenage drama, you know. Or my 13-year-old son will knock on my door. "Hey mommy, what do you think about insert random thing here?" That is success for me.
And shouldn't that be success for everybody to have a stable, healthy relationship with your family, with your kids, and to just be there for each other versus some arbitrary number that after inflation is actually going to buy you less than it did, last year?
Well, and I'm sure you've probably have seen this. You would think that people would want that as success, but depending on the person, money is the most important thing to some. And
It's probably because they're
I,
reading the wrong handbook, right? They have that traditional handbook and it's outdated. I've loved the
right,
conversation,
I agree.
Devin. If somebody was listening to this and they wanted to connect with you, reach out, they wanted to learn more about what you do, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm on there every day. So you can just find me by my name, Devon Bruce. I'm usually the first person that shows up. And if you find out more about my company, you can go to EnglishCommunicationAcademy.com, where you learn about what we do, my team and I, and how we help healthcare organizations solve their communication breakdowns.
Beautiful. And we'll include those links in the bio. Devin, once again, this has been a very powerful conversation because it
Thank
reframes
you.
something that most people completely overlook. Communication isn't about sounding better, it's about thinking clearer, deciding faster, and leading with precision. If you're listening to this episode and you're building something amazing, a business, a team, or your own career because you are amazing, this is one of those key points of leverage that compounds exponentially over time. Once again, we'll link Devin and the English Communication Academy in the show notes. And if this episode made you think differently, if it gave you a blueprint to help you grow and scale, make sure you smash the like button, share this episode with a friend, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell. If you have questions for me or for Devin, leave a review. Once again, this is MyFinJourney. Thanks for your time. Bye, guys.